The twin suns of Zirentha rose slowly above the horizon, their light spilling across the crystal towers of the royal city. The world was beautiful, radiant, and proud. Its rulers, the Chiron dynasty, had stood unchallenged for centuries. To the outside eye, they seemed perfect, tall, graceful beings with shimmering exoskeletons that glowed faintly under the sun's light. Their culture prized strength, agility, and elegance above all things. Every child born to the dynasty was measured by those standards, and their worth was spoken of in whispers long before they were old enough to understand. And so, when Princess Valera was born, the palace was filled with both joy and disappointment. She was the emperor's youngest child, born of the Empress Lyrian in the high chambers overlooking the gardens. Her arrival was celebrated with fireworks and song, but when the healers examined her tiny frame, their voices grew quiet. Her exoskeleton was weaker than that of her siblings. Her movements were slow, her legs unsteady. The healers spoke carefully, but the truth was clear. She would never run as swiftly as others of her kind. She would never be able to fight with strength. Among the Chiron, this was considered a flaw that no amount of nobility could erase. As Valera grew, her siblings raced through the gardens with blades in their hands, practicing their duels. They climbed the crystal towers with ease, their voices filled with laughter. Valera, however, could not follow. She moved carefully, always aware that a fall could injure her far more than it would them. She spent much of her childhood in the libraries of the palace, surrounded by the glowing tablets of history and philosophy. While others trained their bodies, she sharpened her mind. Her tutors discovered quickly that she was gifted. She learned languages with ease, understood the movements of the stars, and spoke with clarity beyond her years. In council lessons, she could predict the outcome of debates before they happened. But none of this mattered in the eyes of the court, for the court saw only what she lacked. When the great houses visited the palace, they brought their heirs to compete, to show their strength and skill. Valera was often seated apart, watching the contests instead of joining them. Nobles smiled politely at her, but their eyes carried pity or disdain. Some whispered that she should have been hidden away. Others claimed she was a burden the dynasty would carry forever. Valera heard the whispers, even when she pretended not to. By the time she reached her youth, the expectations of the royal court had grown sharper. Each of her siblings was expected to form alliances with noble houses through ritual mating bonds, ensuring loyalty between families. These unions were not simply about affection. They were about power, trade, and survival. To bond with a royal heir was to gain status and influence, but when it came to Valera, no house stepped forward. At first, her parents made excuses. They claimed she was too young, that the time was not right. But as years passed, the truth became undeniable. The other houses feared that bonding with her would be seen as weakness. None wished to tie their legacy to a princess whose body did not reflect their ideals of strength, and so she remained unchosen. This unspoken rejection weighed heavily on her. Valera did not show her pain in public. Her face was calm, her voice steady, her words always respectful. But when she was alone in the gardens at night, she allowed herself to feel the ache. She would gaze up at the stars, wondering why she had been born different, why she had to carry this burden in a family that valued perfection. Yet despite the loneliness, she did not give in to despair. Valera discovered something that few of her kind ever sought: patience. She learned to listen where others rushed to speak, to observe where others fought to prove themselves. Her sharp mind allowed her to see patterns others overlooked. She realized that strength could be more than physical. It could be the strength to endure, to think clearly, to resist cruelty with quiet dignity, and slowly, very slowly, her presence began to unsettle the court. Some advisors began to notice that her words in council carried unusual wisdom. During disputes between noble houses, she often offered solutions that prevented bloodshed. When negotiations with traders from other systems grew tense, her calm voice found middle ground. Even her father, the emperor, began to listen more closely when she spoke, but still, the stigma of her body remained. At gatherings, her siblings danced with potential partners, their movements elegant, their laughter bright. Valera stood at the edge of the chamber, dressed in silks of pale silver, her crown reflecting the light, beautiful in her own way, but alone. Nobles nodded to her with respect for her title, but none extended a hand. One evening during the Festival of Twin Suns, The rejection became impossible to ignore. The great hall was filled with music and the air shimmered with colored lights. Valera's sisters and brothers stood with their chosen mates celebrated by the crowd. When Valera entered, the music slowed and conversations quieted. Nobles greeted her, but their eyes avoided hers. None stepped forward. She walked with her head high, refusing to show her pain, but deep inside, she felt the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. Unwanted, unworthy, unseen. Later that night, she returned to her private chambers and looked into the mirror. Her reflection stared back. A young woman with bright violet eyes, intelligent and sharp, framed by the soft glow of her weakened exoskeleton. She whispered to herself, "Perhaps this is my fate. To serve my people in silence, but never to be chosen." And yet, even as she said it, another thought stirred within her. Or perhaps fate has simply not revealed its true design. Valera turned her gaze back toward the stars beyond her window. Among those distant lights, countless worlds and countless species thrived. The galaxy was vast, and though the court dismissed her, she could not shake the feeling that her story was not yet finished. She did not know then that far away, across the stars, a new people were rising, humans. A young and unpredictable species who had only just begun to step into galactic politics. Unlike the noble houses of Zarentha, they measured worth not only in strength but also in courage, compassion, and choice. And one among them, a man who had never even heard her name, would one day walk into her life and ask the question no one else dared to. But for now, Princess Valera stood alone in her chamber, the unwanted heir of Zarentha, unaware that destiny was already moving toward her. The galaxy was vast, filled with countless stars and civilizations. Some were ancient, their histories stretching back thousands of years. Others were new, still learning how to move among the stars. Humanity belonged to the latter. They had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel, and their first steps into the wider galaxy were cautious but full of curiosity. The Chiron Empire had heard whispers of them. Small reports from traders spoke of a species that was short-lived compared to others, yet remarkably resilient. They were said to adapt quickly, to learn fast, and to survive where others would fail. Some dismissed these stories as exaggerations. To the great houses of Zarentha, humans were still outsiders and untested, unproven, and unworthy of serious attention. That opinion was about to change. A new delegation, on the day of the human delegation's arrival, the royal city glittered with light. Banners of crystal cloth waved from the towers, and the main courtyard of the palace was prepared with precision. Courtiers and nobles gathered, curious to see these new arrivals with their own eyes. The emperor himself chose to welcome them, for though humans were still small on the galactic stage, their sudden rise was too fast to ignore. Princess Valera watched from the balcony above the courtyard. She stood apart as always, her silver gown trailing along the polished floor. Her siblings were already below, ready to greet the guests. Each one stood tall, exoskeletons gleaming, voices full of pride. Valera folded her hands together and breathed quietly. She did not expect to be noticed. She had attended many such gatherings before, and always her presence was more formality than substance. Yet something within her urged her to watch closely this time. Something felt different. The great doors of the palace opened. The first look at humans. The humans entered in a small group. They were shorter than most Chiron nobles, their bodies softer and lacking the crystalline exoskeleton that shimmered under the suns. They wore simple but dignified uniforms of deep blue, marked with silver insignias. Their movements were steady, not boastful, and their eyes scanned the hall with quiet alertness. The leader of the group was a woman named Ambassador Celine Ward. She carried herself with confidence, bowing deeply before the emperor and offering words of respect. Her voice was calm, her tone diplomatic, but among the delegation was another figure who caught Valera's eye. He was not the leader nor the highest-ranked officer. His uniform was neat but plain, marked with the emblem of a starship captain. His name was Elias Rourke. There was nothing extraordinary about his appearance compared to the others. His hair was dark, his face weathered slightly by years of service, his posture neither proud nor submissive. Yet there was something in his gaze, a quiet strength, a willingness to see rather than simply to judge. When the Chiron nobles looked at the humans, most of them saw only strangeness or inferiority. But when Elias's eyes moved across the hall, they lingered on details. The architecture, the expressions of the courtiers, even the way the light shifted across the crystal floors. He was not here to impress. He was here to understand. Valera found herself watching him more than the others. The ceremony of words, the emperor welcomed the delegation with grand speech, speaking of alliances, trade, and the future. Noble houses added their own flowery words, each trying to measure the humans without revealing too much. It was a dance of politics as old as the empire itself. The humans responded with their own prepared words, humble yet firm. They spoke of cooperation, of learning, of finding strength in diversity. Some nobles smiled politely, but in truth many were unimpressed. To them the humans seemed too plain, too fragile, too new. After the speeches, the guests were guided to a great banquet. Long tables of crystal were filled with dishes from across the empire, each one shining with color and taste. Music filled the hall and nobles drifted between conversations. Valera remained at her place along the edge of the chamber, as was usual. Her siblings spoke proudly with human leaders, each trying to gain favor or show dominance. The nobles surrounded them, leaving her apart. She expected the night to pass as always, herself unnoticed, her words unheard. But then, something unusual happened. A seat at the edge. Elias Rourke, the quiet captain, drifted away from the center of the hall. He accepted a glass of shining liquid from a servant, thanked them softly, and began to move along the edges of the room. His eyes wandered, studying the artwork on the walls, the patterns of the music, and finally the people who stood alone. That was when he saw her. Valera stood near a tall window, the light of the twin suns catching her silver gown. She held herself with calm dignity, though her eyes betrayed a quiet loneliness. Elias hesitated for a moment, then walked toward her. The courtiers nearby glanced at him with surprise. No one ever approached the unwanted heir. "Your Highness," Elias said with a respectful bow, his voice steady but not overly formal. "May I join you?" Valera blinked, startled. Few ever addressed her directly, and never with such simple sincerity. She inclined her head slightly. "If you wish," she replied. And so he stood beside her, not demanding her attention, but simply sharing the silence for a moment. A conversation. Unseen, after a pause, Elias spoke again. "Your city is remarkable," he said, his eyes wandering to the towers beyond the window. "It feels alive, almost as if it's grown rather than built." Valera looked at him, surprised by his words. Most visitors praised the empire's strength, its armies, its wealth. Few noticed the artistry, the harmony of design. "You see what others overlook," she said quietly. Elias smiled faintly. "Sometimes the overlooked things are the most important." That simple reply stirred something within her. For years, she had lived as the overlooked one, dismissed by those who judged only her body, and here stood a stranger, speaking of the unseen with quiet respect. Their conversation grew slowly, naturally. They did not speak of politics or alliances, but of ideas and stories. Elias asked her about the stars visible from Zyrentha, and she told him of constellations shaped by her people's myths. She asked him about Earth, and he spoke of oceans vast and wild, of forests older than any city. As they talked, Valera felt a strange warmth. It was not pity in his eyes nor judgment. It was simple curiosity, simple respect, as if he saw her not as a symbol but as a person. Whispers in the hall around them the nobles noticed. They whispered behind jeweled hands, exchanging glances of disbelief. To them it was strange. A human, a newcomer, speaking with the princess who was avoided by her own people. Some shook their heads, dismissing it as meaningless. Others frowned, unsettled by the sight, but Valera paid them no mind. For the first time in many years, she felt the weight of silence lift. She laughed softly at one of Elias's stories about the chaos of early space travel, and her laughter surprised even herself. The emperor, seated across the hall, observed them as well. His face revealed little, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He had long accepted that Valera would remain unchosen, yet here was a moment he had not expected. The end of the night. When the banquet ended, the humans prepared to depart. Ambassador Ward thanked the emperor again, and the delegation began to leave the hall. Elias bowed once more to Valera. "Thank you for your time, princess," he said. "I hope we will speak again." Valera inclined her head, her voice calm but touched with sincerity. "As do I, Captain Rourke." As he walked away, Valeera remained by the window, her thoughts restless. Something had shifted that night. She could not explain it, but she knew one thing with certainty. She had been seen, truly seen in a way she never had before, and far across the hall, Elias Rourke glanced back once, his eyes lingering for just a heartbeat longer before he disappeared through the doors. A quiet change later. In her private chamber, Valeera stood once more before her mirror. Her reflection was the same as always, violet eyes, silver gown, fragile frame. Yet inside she felt something different. The loneliness was still there, but beside it was a spark of hope. She whispered softly to herself, "Perhaps not all eyes are blind." She turned to the stars beyond her window. The galaxy remained vast, filled with uncertainty and danger, but somewhere within it, among these new humans, there was at least one who had spoken to her not with pity, but with respect. And though she did not yet know it, this was only the beginning, for the bond between them, fragile and new, would one day change not only her fate, but the fate of empires. The twin suns of Zerentha shone bright upon the capital, but within the walls of the imperial palace shadows had begun to gather. The court was restless. Rumors spread quickly through the marble halls and crystal gardens. A hostile faction was moving against the empire. The Drakthar coalition, rivals who had long despised the Chiron dynasty, had sent a challenge. They demanded proof of unity from Zerentha. If the Chiron Empire could not present its heirs and their bonded mates standing together as one, the Drakthar would see them as weak, and weakness in the galaxy was always followed by war. The Emperor summoned his council. Nobles from the great houses arrived, their robes glittering, their voices sharp. Princess Valeera sat quietly near the edge of the chamber as she always did. Her siblings stood in the center, strong and proud, each one already bonded with a partner from the noble houses. They were symbols of strength, and their alliances gave weight to the Empire's claims. But Valeera remained alone. Whispers of shame as the council spoke of strategy. The whispers returned on those cruel familiar words. She cannot stand before the galaxy unbonded. She is a weak point. The Drakthar will seize upon it. Better to hide her away during the trial. Valeera lowered her gaze, though her heart burned. She had endured these whispers for years, but hearing them now in the face of war was sharper than ever. Her worth was being measured not by her mind, not by her wisdom, but by her body and her unchosen status. The Emperor's voice thundered above the debate. "Silence! She is still my daughter." The chamber quieted, but the truth remained heavy in the air. The court did not believe she could stand among the heirs without bringing shame. Elias speaks. The humans were present at the council as guests, standing near the edge of the chamber. Ambassador Selene Ward kept her tone diplomatic, but her eyes were sharp, measuring every noble's word. Beside her stood Captain Elias Rourke, quiet as ever, his hands folded behind his back. When the voices grew loud again, Elias did something no one expected. He stepped forward. At first, no one noticed. The nobles were too caught up in their arguments, but then his voice rang out steady and clear. "If I may speak." The chamber fell silent, shocked that an outsider would interrupt. All eyes turned to him. Some were amused, others offended. The Emperor's gaze narrowed, but he did not silence him. Elias continued. "You say the princess is a weakness because she has no bond. Yet I see no weakness in her. I see someone who listens when others only shout. Someone who sees paths where others see only walls." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Valeera's eyes widened slightly. "And if the problem," Elias went on, "is that she stands without a mate, then the solution is simple." He turned, meeting Valeera's gaze. His next word seemed to echo through the hall. "If none of you will stand with her, then I will." Shock in the court gasps filled the chamber. Nobles rose from their seats, their voices overlapping in disbelief. "A human dares. This is absurd. An outsider cannot bond with a royal heir." The Emperor himself stood, his voice booming. "Captain Rourke, do you understand what you are saying? This is not a game. A bond is not a passing word. It is a union of mind, spirit, and future." Elias met his gaze without flinching. "I understand, Majesty. And I mean what I say." Valeera's heart raced. She had spent her life believing no one would ever choose her. Yet here stood a human, offering freely what her own people had denied. She could hardly breathe, torn between disbelief and hope. The Emperor's dilemma. The council erupted into argument again. Some nobles called the idea insulting. Others claimed it was dangerous. No human had ever attempted the rite of Concord, the ceremony that tested the strength of a bond. Failure could bring dishonor not only to Valira, but to the Empire itself. The Emperor raised a hand for silence. His eyes moved from Elias to his daughter. He studied Valira's face, searching for her thoughts. At last he spoke. "If this is truly your wish, Captain, then the rite of Concord must decide." The chamber stirred. The rite was ancient, unyielding. Two partners who wished to bond had to face the trial, a merging of minds under the guidance of the Empire's seers. If their bond was false, if their spirits clashed, the trial would fail, sometimes painfully. But if they succeeded, their union would shine as proof of truth. The Emperor's gaze returned to Valira. "And you, daughter? Do you accept this?" Valira's voice trembled, but her words were steady. "I do." The chamber erupted once more, but above it all, Elias simply nodded, preparing for the rite. The days that followed were filled with tension. News of the declaration spread through the city like fire. Some mocked it, calling it a desperate act. Others whispered that perhaps this strange human saw something the nobles did not. Valira felt the weight of every eye upon her. Doubt pressed at her heart. What if Elias had spoken only out of pity? What if the rite revealed weakness instead of strength? Yet each time these thoughts arose, she remembered the calm certainty in his gaze when he had spoken. He had not looked at her with pity. He had looked at her as though she mattered. Elias, meanwhile, spent his time learning. He asked the seers about the rite, listened to every word, studied every warning. Many tried to discourage him, telling him humans were not suited for such trials, but he did not waver. One evening, Valira found him in the garden, standing beneath the twin moons. For a moment, she simply watched him. Then she spoke softly. "Why did you do it?" Elias turned to her, his expression calm. "Because you deserve someone to stand beside you. And because I believe strength is more than what your court claims." Her chest tightened at his words. For so long, she had carried silence alone. Now someone shared it, the day of the rite. The chamber of the rite was unlike any other place in the palace. It was a circle of crystal and stone, lit by the soft glow of ancient runes. At its center stood two seats facing one another where the bond seekers would sit. Around the circle, the nobles gathered, their eyes sharp with expectation. The Emperor watched from his throne, his face unreadable. Valira entered in robes of silver and violet, her crown light upon her head. Elias stood opposite, dressed simply in the formal attire given to him. They took their places facing one another. The seers began the ceremony. Their voices echoed, calling upon the ancient traditions. Then silence fell. "Join hands," the chief seer instructed. Valira hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in Elias's. His touch was warm, steady. The seer's voice deepened. "Now open your minds. Let your spirits touch." The trial within at once, the chamber around them dissolved. Valira felt herself pulled into a vast space of light and shadow. It was the realm of the rite, where thoughts and souls intertwined. She stood, her body glowing faintly, her weaknesses visible even here. Before her stood Elias, his form solid, grounded. "Do not fear," he said softly, though his voice seemed to echo from everywhere at once. The trial began. Waves of doubt struck her first, images of the whispers she had endured, nobles laughing, siblings dancing without her, her reflection alone in the mirror. They surrounded her like chains. She staggered beneath their weight, but Elias stepped forward, breaking through the storm. He reached for her hand again. "These are not who you are," he said. "They are only shadows." His certainty gave her strength. She lifted her head, her violet eyes glowing brighter. Then came the second trial, the clash of wills. The rite tested whether two spirits could align. A force pressed between them, pushing them apart, demanding that one dominate the other. Valira resisted, but her strength faltered. She feared that her weakness would break the bond. But Elias did not push against her. Instead, he bent, yielding space, inviting balance, not domination, he whispered. Partnership. Something shifted. Instead of clashing, their spirits began to move together like two rivers joining into one. Light flared around them. Success, When Valira opened her eyes, she was back in the chamber. Her hand was still in Elias's, and around them the circle of runes blazed with radiant light. The seers fell silent, awe on their faces. The bond had succeeded. Gasps rose from the nobles. Some were outraged, others stunned, but none could deny what they had seen. Against every expectation, the human and the unwanted princess had passed the rite of conquered. Valira's heart pounded. For the first time in her life, she was no longer alone. She had been chosen, not out of duty, not out of politics, but by someone who truly saw her. Elias's voice was quiet, but firm. I told you, strength is more than flawless bodies. It is unbroken spirits. A turning point, the Emperor rose slowly from his throne. His face, usually stern, softened as he looked at his daughter. Very well, he said. Let the galaxy see this bond. Let them see that the Chiron dynasty stands united, with humanity at our side. Cheers erupted from some, anger from others, but it no longer mattered. The bond was real, undeniable, and it had changed everything. As the chamber filled with noise, Valira and Elias exchanged a glance. No words were needed. They both knew that the path ahead would be difficult. The Drakthar threat remained, and many in the court still despised what had happened. But they also knew one thing with certainty. Together, they could face it. The palace of Zirentha did not sleep the night after the rite of conquered. Word spread like a storm through the empire. The unwanted princess had bonded not with a noble of the Chiron houses, but with a human outsider. Some were outraged, their voices sharp in the council halls. Others were cautious, uncertain of what this meant. But among the common citizens, whispers carried hope. They had seen the light of the right. They had seen Princess Valira stand tall beside her chosen mate. And though many still doubted, a seed of change had been planted. But celebration was brief. The Empire had little time to rest, for the challenge from the Drakthar coalition remained. The enemy demanded unity. The nobles doubted Elias's worth, claiming that a human bond could not stand the test of true strength. And so, the Emperor declared, Valira and Elias must face the trial of unity, an ancient ceremony of both mind and action. If they succeeded, no one could question their bond. If they failed, the Empire's enemies would seize upon the weakness. Doubts in the court. The next morning, the council gathered again. The great hall was filled with nobles, their jeweled robes sparkling under the suns. This is madness, one elder hissed. A human cannot endure the trial. His spirit will break. Another sneered. If the princess fails again, the Drakthar will laugh at us. Better to hide her as we always have. Valira sat quietly at her place, her chin lifted though her heart felt heavy. She had fought her whole life to prove she was more than her body. Now she had proven her bond, but still the voices doubted her. Elias stood beside her, calm as ever. When the arguments grew loud, he finally spoke. Perhaps you are right, he said simply. Perhaps I will fail. But perhaps you should consider another truth, that sometimes strength lies where you least expect it. His steady words silenced the hall. The Emperor rose, his voice final. Enough, the trial will decide. Words are nothing. Only the truth of the trial matters. The trial announced, the trial of unity was different from the rite of conquered. Where the rite tested the truth of a bond in spirit, the trial tested its strength under pressure. It was both a mental and physical ordeal, a series of challenges designed to force two partners to act as one. In the ancient times, when the Chiron Empire first rose, every royal pair was tested in this way. The trial had faded into ceremony over the centuries, but now it would return to its full power. The news spread beyond the palace, through the streets of the capital, and out to the colonies. The citizens prepared to watch through crystal screens, eager to see whether the strange new union would shine or shatter. Fear and resolve in the quiet of her chamber, Valira sat by the window, the moons casting soft light over her face. Her thoughts were restless. What if she failed? What if her body, fragile compared to others, could not endure the physical trials? She feared not only her own shame, but also the weight Elias would carry if they stumbled. Her doubts were interrupted by a soft knock. The door opened and Elias stepped in. He looked at her, his expression gentle. You're afraid, he said, not as an accusation but as a truth. Yes, Valira admitted softly. I have always feared. My whole life I have feared not being enough. Elias came closer, sitting across from her. Do you know what I have learned as a human? She looked at him questioningly. That fear doesn't mean weakness. Fear means the choice matters, and when it matters, you don't run from it. You walk through it. His words eased something within her. For years her people had told her that fear was shame, but Elias spoke of fear as proof of courage. She reached for his hand and he clasped it firmly. Then, she whispered, we walk through it together. The Arena of Unity. The day of the trial came. The arena was an ancient structure, carved from crystal and stone where countless heirs had once been tested. Its walls glowed with symbols of history, and at its center stood a platform large enough for the challenges to unfold. Nobles filled the high seats, their eyes sharp. Citizens across the empire watched from afar. At the highest seat sat the emperor, his face solemn. Valeera and Elias entered the arena side by side. She wore armor of light silver, designed to protect without weighing her down. Elias wore the same, though less polished, his human form unfamiliar in such garb. Yet as they stepped into the light, they walked as one. The seer who led the ceremony raised his staff. The trial of unity begins. The first challenge. The maze of shadows. The floor of the arena shifted, transforming into a maze of walls and corridors. Darkness fell, broken only by faint glowing paths. The first trial is trust, the seer declared. Only one may see the true path. The other must follow without doubt. A light appeared in Valeera's eyes. She could see faint markings along the walls that revealed the safe way forward. Elias, however, saw only darkness. She hesitated. What if she led him wrong? Elias's voice broke her doubt. I trust you, lead. Her heart steadied. She guided him through the maze, her hand never letting go of his. When the shadows grew thicker, Elias never questioned her, never pulled away. Step by step they reached the end, the maze dissolving into light. The nobles murmured in surprise. Few expected them to succeed so smoothly. The second challenge. The weight of burden, the ground shifted again. Heavy stones glowing with energy appeared around them. The second trial is strength, the seer declared. The burdens are too heavy for one alone. They must be carried together. Valeera's heart sank. Her body was weaker than most. She could not lift the stones as easily as others, but Elias knelt beside her. We don't need to lift them alone. We balance them together. They placed their hands on the same stone, lifting in unison. At first Valeera stumbled, her arms trembling. Elias adjusted, taking more of the weight but never making her feel lesser. Steady, he said softly. We moved together, and slowly, step by step, they carried each burden to its place. The audience watched in silence as the fragile princess bore her part, not by strength alone, but by unity. The third challenge, the trial of mind, the arena shifted again, and the walls melted into a storm of illusions. Images of fear and doubt swirled around them. Nobles mocking Valeera, soldiers laughing at Elias, visions of failure and defeat. The third trial is the mind, the seer intoned. If doubt divides them, they will be lost. The illusions pressed hard. Valeera saw herself falling, shamed before the court. Elias saw earth burning, his people scorned as weak. The storm pulled at them, trying to separate them. But Elias reached for her hand again. Look at me, she did, her violet eyes locking onto his. These are lies, he said firmly. The only truth is this, us standing together. Valeera drew strength from his certainty. She focused on his face, on the warmth of his hand. Slowly the illusions began to fade. Together, they walked through the storm until the light returned. The final challenge, the leap of faith. At last, the arena shifted one more time. Before them yawned a great chasm, its depths glowing with fire. A single narrow bridge stretched across, but it shook violently, ready to collapse. The final trial is faith, the seer declared. They must cross together. If one falls, both fail. The nobles leaned forward, eager to see the outcome. Elias looked at Valeera. Do you trust me? She nodded. Always. They stepped onto the bridge. The ground trembled, stones falling away. Halfway across, the bridge cracked, leaving a wide gap too far for one to leap alone. For a heartbeat, fear seized Valeera. Her body could not make the jump. But Elias held her close. Together, he whispered. He leapt, carrying her weight, while she pushed with all her strength beside him. For a moment it seemed they would fall. but their combined effort carried them to the other side. The crowd gasped as they landed safely. The bridge shattered behind them, falling into fire. The trial was complete. Triumph. The seer raised his staff. The trial of unity is fulfilled. Their bond is true. The arena filled with light. Cheers erupted from the citizens, though the nobles were divided. Some clapped stiffly, others frowned. But none could deny what they had seen. The unwanted princess and the human outsider had faced the ancient trial and emerged victorious. Valeera stood tall beside Elias, her violet eyes glowing with pride. For the first time in her life, she was not simply enduring, she was triumphing. And she was not alone. Elias looked at her, his voice low. "We did it," she smiled, a real smile, brighter than any she had shown in years. "Yes, we did." A new dawn that night, the Empire buzzed with news. Across the stars, messages flew. The princess and the human had passed the trial. The Drakthar coalition would not find weakness here. In the palace, the Emperor addressed his people. "Let the galaxy know," he declared, "that strength is not only in perfection of body but in the unity of spirit. Let them see that our empire stands with humanity at our side." And so a new chapter began. The path ahead was still uncertain, filled with danger and doubt. But Valeera and Elias had proven themselves. Together they had shown that strength could be found in trust, in balance, in faith. And though the galaxy still whispered, their voices no longer mattered. For Valeera had been chosen not by politics or by pity, but by a heart that truly saw her. And that choice had changed everything. The night after the trial of unity was unlike any other in Zarentha's history. In the streets of the capital, lights glowed like stars fallen to the ground. Citizens celebrated, music filled the air, and children danced through the avenues. For so long they had seen Princess Valeera as a shadowed figure, hidden away in silence. Now she was something new, a symbol of hope. But in the high halls of the palace, the air was not so simple. The nobles gathered again, their voices sharp, their faces uncertain. Some spoke of honor, others of fear. Though the trial had been won, not all were ready to accept a human in their midst. The council's unease. The Emperor's council chamber glittered with crystal walls. The nobles sat in a circle, their robes heavy with jewels. At the center stood Emperor Calith, his eyes calm yet stern. One noble rose, his voice cold. "The trial may be complete, but what of the future? Will we allow this human to sit beside us in decisions of state? Will we let him influence the Empire?" Another hissed, "The Drakthar watch us still. They wait for weakness. If we stand divided, they will strike. But are we not already divided?" A younger voice countered. It was Lady Serenia, one of the few nobles who had spoken kindly of Valeera in the past. "Did we not see unity with our own eyes? Should we blind ourselves because it does not fit our pride?" The room grew tense. Pride was the hidden wound of the Chiron court. For centuries, perfection had been their measure. But now imperfection had brought them strength. The Emperor finally raised his hand. Silence fell. "We cannot deny what has happened," he said. "The trial was fulfilled. Unity was proven. We stand on the edge of a storm, and storms care little for our pride. What matters is survival, and survival comes from strength. Whether you accept it or not, strength now wears two faces. That of my daughter and that of the human who chose her." His words ended the debate. None could defy the Emperor openly, but many nobles left with unease still in their hearts. Quiet moments. While the council quarreled, Valeera and Elias found a rare moment of peace. They sat together in the gardens behind the palace. The air was cool, the moons casting silver light over the trees. Valeera looked at Elias, her violet eyes soft. "Do you regret it?" "Regret what?" he asked, leaning back against the smooth stone bench. "Choosing me, standing before the court, binding yourself to someone every other noble turned away from." Elias smiled faintly. "Not once. You think I only saw what they saw? No, I saw you. Your mind, your courage, your kindness. They missed it because they never looked beyond the surface. But I did." Her chest tightened. For so long she had believed her worth was hidden, buried under the shame of her body. Yet here was someone who had seen it all along. "You changed everything," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, you did. I only stood beside you." For a while they sat in silence, listening to the wind in the trees. The weight of what lay ahead pressed on them, but for that moment, they simply existed, not as princess and outsider, but as two souls who had chosen each other. The Drakthar threat, but peace could not last. Only days after the trial, news arrived from the outer colonies. The Drakthar fleet had entered Zerentha's border systems. They claimed the Empire was weak, that its unity was false. The Emperor called his council again. Tension filled the air as reports showed the scale of the enemy fleet. The Drakthar were not simply testing them, they were preparing for war. "Their demand is simple," said General Orath grimly. "They want proof that the Empire stands united. If they see division, they will attack. And they think my daughter and her bond with the human are signs of weakness," the Emperor said. His gaze hardened. "Then we must show them it is strength." The decision was made. Valera and Elias would lead a delegation to the Drakthar, not with armies, but with diplomacy. If they could prove their unity in the face of the enemy, war might yet be avoided. The journey, the royal flagship Starlance, carried them through the void. Its hull shimmered with shields, its halls filled with both Chiron officers and human envoys. For many of the crew, it was their first time working side by side with humans. Valera spent hours preparing speeches, her mind sharp with strategy. Elias, however, spoke often with the crew. He shared simple stories of Earth, of oceans and forests, of families and children. His words softened hearts in ways no speech could. At night, when the stars drifted past their window, Valera asked him, "Why do you tell them such small stories? Do you not think they need grand tales of courage?" "Grand tales are easy to doubt," Elias replied. "But small ones feel real. And when something feels real, people believe in it." She considered his words and realized they carried a wisdom her people often overlooked. The confrontation. The Drakthar flagship awaited them at the edge of a red star system. Its design was brutal, all jagged metal and sharp spires glowing with the fire of engines. Valera and Elias entered the negotiation chamber, a place carved with stone and fire. At its center stood the Drakthar warlord, massive and armored, his voice deep as thunder. "So," he growled, "the broken princess and her pet human come to speak. Tell me, why should we believe your empire is strong?" The insult burned, but Valera did not flinch. She stepped forward, her voice steady. "Because strength is not found in perfection. Strength is found in standing together. Even when the galaxy doubts you. You think unity is a mask, but we have lived it. We have been tested. We have triumphed," the warlord sneered. "Words are wind. Show me proof." Elias stepped beside her. He met the warlord's burning eyes without fear. "You already saw the proof, though you don't want to admit it. You expected us to stand apart, but here we are, bonded, unbroken, and stronger for it." The chamber grew tense. The Drakthar did not answer at once. He studied them, perhaps searching for weakness, perhaps finding none. Finally he spoke. "Very well. We will not strike today. But know this. If your unity cracks, we will return, and next time there will be no words." It was not peace, but it was a reprieve. The return. When Starlance returned to Zerentha, the people cheered. The news spread quickly. War had been delayed, perhaps even avoided. The princess and the human had faced the Drakthar and stood tall. In the palace, the Emperor embraced his daughter, his voice heavy with pride. "You have done more than I ever expected. You have changed not only your fate, but the fate of the Empire." Valera bowed her head. "I only did what was right." "No," the Emperor said softly. "You did what was brave." A new era weeks passed. Slowly, the nobles began to shift. Some still resisted, but others began to see that humanity brought more than weakness. It brought perspective. Trade between Earth and Zerentha grew. Scholars exchanged ideas. Soldiers trained together. For Valera, life changed in ways she never dreamed. No longer was she the princess hidden in shadows. Now people sought her counsel. Children sent her letters calling her their inspiration. And beside her always was Elias. One evening, as they stood on the palace balcony watching the sun set, Elias said quietly, "You know, when I first came here, I never thought I'd be standing in a place like this." "And when I was a child," Valera replied, "I never thought anyone would stand beside me." They looked at each other, and for a moment the galaxy itself seemed to fall silent. Legacy in the years that followed. Stories of their bond spread far beyond Zerentha. To some it was a tale of politics. To others it was a tale of hope. But to those who knew the truth it was simple. Two souls unlikely and unlooked for who had found strength in each other. And so the unwanted princess became the chosen leader. And the human outsider became the first of his kind to shape the stars. Together, they began a new dawn, one not built on perfection, but on unity. And when the galaxy looked back on those days, it remembered not the doubts, nor the insults, nor the threats of war. It remembered the question that changed everything. Will you stand with me? And the answer that lit a new age, yes.